right, welcome back to What's Up Wandsworth, and we're here today with Tom from Backstory. Thanks for having us, Tom. Great to be here. It would be great to hear a little bit about your background, what led you to start Backstory, and what your vision is for it and what your hopes are for it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to come on. I've been a journalist for 11 years at the Telegraph and latterly The Economist for about 5 years. But I sort of always loved bookshops. I always thought that they were sort of very special places. And I sort of had a bit of a kind of pipe dream, I guess, like lots of us do, that, maybe one day in an alternative life, I would have a bookshop. And then I think like quite a lot of people, an alternative life came about in 2020 with COVID. And suddenly I went from having a job which meant that I was going places and seeing lots of the world, which is an amazing privilege, but not necessarily being very sort of rooted in a local area, to then sort of living my life like we all did within a few streets and getting to spend more time in my community. And I live just across the common in Clapham. So, I was spending lots of time on the common, walking around, all that sort of stuff. And I thought actually that was a kind of life I quite liked. And so that combined with a sort of what I felt was a renewed interest in community projects and a sort of the beginnings of a backlash against some of these sort of big online giants made me think that sort of, if not now, when? And that's how Backstory came about.
Great. What do you hope to do with it, or what do you hope it does for people in the community, perhaps?
Well, for one example, which I thought was lovely and which I couldn't really have hoped for already. I mean, we've only been open 3 months, but just a couple of days ago, I was in here behind our bar. The bookshop has a sort of long bar counter, which doubles as the serving counter where we sell the books, but where people also can perch up and have a coffee or a glass of wine or a beer. And the other afternoon, it must have been about 2 p.m., 3 p.m., something like that, there were 3 of our regulars, which is lovely, we already have regulars, sort of perched up here, each on their own with a book that they bought here, reading it. And then a newcomer, I think it was his first visit, was up there having a cup of tea. And they just sort of ended up kind of joshing with each other. And it was kind of a moment of shared contentment and togetherness, even though they were all, on their own reading their books. And I thought that was lovely. And it's not the only time that that's happened where, staff have obviously shared their book recommendations, but customers end up sharing them with each other. And there's that sort of wonderful sense of kind of spontaneous discovery, which is kind of almost like a kind of very Victorian algorithm. It's sort of like the opposite of that, on the website that I dang up name. And it's a very human, very grounded, very local version of that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And because reading a book is, by definition, a very individualistic act. It's something usually it's done on your own, maybe in your room. So is there something about the bookshop that becomes so important because it's the antithesis of doing it on your own? So that's like your one chance to go and actually talk about the books and because most people don't write book reviews and things like that. But you have any thoughts on that? How is the shop becoming that place?
I think that's right. I think it's a good point. And certainly, I think reading can be characterized as quite a sort of solitary activity. I'm not sure it needs to be. I mean, one of the other things I love is sort of theatre and that sense of sort of having a shared cultural experience and then, nipping to the bar at the interval and swapping notes with a friend or whatever. And I think in the same way, it can be just the most wonderful bonding experience, actually, to find something in literature which kind of resonates with you or which you feel, portrays some aspect of life that you're struggling with or whatever that you realize is actually more universal than you thought. And then to be able to kind of recommend that to a friend or a complete stranger as we're doing here.
And that, of course, cannot really be replicated online, although we did try during COVID. So just going back to that a little bit, before COVID, I worked in the city. I would travel in Monday to Friday. It wasn't an option at all, working from home. And then Saturday, if you wanted to do something, often you felt like you would leave the local area, and perhaps even on Sundays. And so COVID reset that, as you said, and we spent much more time in our local area. And do you think that there is this movement now, spending money, spending time in your neighborhood. So is there something about, you live in Clapham, you have the shop here in Balham, about southwest London, where you see this movement?
I think so. I mean, I don't want to overstate it. I think it is quite utopian thinking during the early stages of the pandemic. And I think it is the case that most people who previously worked in office jobs have gone back to working in offices. And, so that hasn't entirely changed. But it is a big shift if they have gone from being in an office 5 days a week to being in an office 3 days a week or something like that. And I think that it's those sort of relatively inconsequential movement for a big company that has an office in a city, which is actually a huge movement for somewhere like Balham, which means that, on a Tuesday afternoon or a Thursday morning or whatever, we do have more people in the local area than we previously would. That footfall doesn't just have to be about Saturday trading, which was always the sort of classic busy day for retail. And we definitely do find people sort of popping on a lunch break or even, coming for a coffee mid-afternoon, perhaps bring a project that they've been mulling over or something. Sometimes it's just sit down, jotting thoughts and then can come out and meet people.
Yeah, that's great. Let's talk a little bit about the bookshop. Have you always been going to bookshop where there's always a local one around? Should it be an independent bookshop in your view, or is it okay to go to a chain?
I mean, obviously, I have a hierarchy. It starts with backstory and then any other chain of bookshop and then a chain and then a supermarket and then way down at the bottom online. But no. I mean, seriously, I love reading. I love it when other people enjoy books, and I'm very happy to see them reading wherever they get their books from. Libraries are great. We have a really thriving one here in Wandsworth. I don't see us as being in competition with them. I think they're complementary. So I think one of the things I'm quite conscious of doing with the bar environment here was, it was a business decision. We make some money on sales of drinks, but it was more than that, to be honest. It was about an atmosphere, and I wanted to create a kind of inviting sense. In kind of contrast to your bookshop where you might open the door, a bell might tingle, someone would come and sort of stare at you from behind the counter and kind of judge your reading habits or whatever. I want something kind of laid back, buzzy, that people might come in and feel free to browse because, there are people chatting up at the counter and they're not going to be kind of stared at or whatever.
Yeah. Perhaps there's a misconception, or maybe it's true. Is it always more expensive to buy a book in a shop like Backstory compared to buying it online? Because I guess there's no other benefit really of buying it online other than convenience and price.
Yeah, I mean, not always true, but I would say most of the time it is true that you could get a book cheaper elsewhere. With Backstory, I think what I'm saying is that you can buy the exact same book somewhere else, but you can buy it with sort of knowledge and with passion, or without that. You can buy it with supporting and nurturing your local community, or without that, you can buy it with corporation tax paid in full, or you can buy it without that. You can buy it in an environment that you feel gives you its own story. You're going back home with a book, but you're also going home with a memory that you're going to cherish about how you came to get that book. And books to me are so much more than a media product to consume. It becomes part of my home long after I originally read the book. And when I look at my bookcase, I can remember interrailing trips when I was 19, or I can remember, who I was in love with at the time that I read a particular book. And similarly, I like the idea that people might think, oh yeah, I got that at that new bookshop in Balham, or I had this lovely conversation with a neighbour who actually I met for the first time there, or I went to an event there and it was great. Do
you take notes in your books? Do you, you underline or write some random thoughts?
So, I do, which I know is highly controversial, I think, among purists. I think it's a sign of a book that I've really enjoyed when it's sitting there with its spine kind of crumpled, or it still smells slightly of sun cream or, and coffee. And actually, I think that's great. You've really treasured it and spent time with it.
Yeah, because I wonder, because I'm kind of I feel like there's something wrong, perhaps underlining it. And I think maybe it comes from this idea that, you know, if you're serious about books, then you should collect them and you should have a library at home, right? Which in London is very difficult.
Yeah.
And it's something that you pass on maybe to your children and someone else, which I don't think most people do. And so, yeah, I think we should take more notes and we should be more rough with our books, perhaps. And you mentioned events, so that's interesting because that goes directly to the community point and inviting people in. And what are your hopes for 2023? What would you love to see?
Quite a few things, actually. I think one of the great things, I've got a team of 5 of us now, and we all sort of have our own kind of passions. So Rory and Amy are absolutely obsessed with sort of Greek mythology books, and there's a whole thing with kind of like feminist retellings of Greek myths, that kind of thing. So I think they'd love to have Natalie Haynes, who's written this amazing book, Stoneblind, in here. I would love, I mean, just some of the people I have always loved reading, like, you know, Robert Harris, I love his spirits. I would absolutely love to have him in for an event. Michael Palin, I think, is one of my favorite writers. I think he does travel writing. It really, really gets under the skin of a place and its people. But I mean, as much as the names are great, to me, it's as much the experiencing and just, as you say, a way to invite people in and to get people in the community to know that we're here and to sort of go deeper than just a sort of classic retail interaction. And so, yeah, I've really enjoyed so far, even with slightly less well-known people, where, you know, people have come and had a glass of wine at the bar and then listened to the event, and then we've all sort of mingled and talked afterwards. And that, again, I suppose going back to what you were saying about reading as a solitary activity, I mean, that's sort of like the ultimate kind of counterpoint to that, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned your journalism background and, you know, speed reading is one thing that you took away from that, although you may or may not do that so much anymore.
Definitely do.
Yeah. Need to get through them. What are some other, you know, benefits of your past professional life when it comes to running a shop and a bookshop specifically?
Well, I mean, I suppose one thing is that I'm fortunate in I had been almost sort of a professional people watcher as a journalist. It was the kind of interesting what makes people tick that made me want to be a journalist. And I think actually in many ways running a shop is similar in that, you know, what it's really about is working out what people want, what people like, keeping your ear close to the ground, but, you know, observing the buying habits of your readers, seeing how you can push them in different directions, and then kind of catering the shop to that. And so that's a helpful skill. Obviously, you know, practical things like enjoying interviewing people and not being that phased about that, even if they are a big name, and helps for getting events and that kind of stuff. Also just, I mean, being really shameless, which, you know, when you're a journalist, you have to ask, you know, probably dozens of times a day for complete strangers to talk to you and to still persuade them to do it. And after a while, you develop quite a thick skin for rejections, and, you know, you also get quite used to asking way above your grade, you know. So, like, you know, as the owner of a new independent tiny bookshop in Balham, you know, asking like Marina Hyde to come and do an event or something, I mean, that's a huge ask. But like, I thought, well, why not? And I think that's probably a helpful attitude to have. Yeah.
What are some book recommendations? And I want to start first, if you could tell us about the worst sort of book experience you've had, or the worst book you've read. And you don't need to name it, but maybe you can describe why it was not the best.
I sure will. I will. I won't name it. But I was sort of thinking, goodness, can I think of one? But actually, one did immediately come to mind. I think so. Where I think there is a sweet spot sometimes is in finding a book that is just kind of fun to read. That is something that, because people lead busy lives, and, you know, often people want to read books to kind of expand their mind or to find out about things, or, you know, to have a great literary adventure, and that's great. But, you know, you have to recognize quite often people want a book as escapism or just a bit of downtime or whatever in it. And so I think the genre of kind of holiday read is actually a real skill, because I think there were really good holiday reads. There are really good fun books that you can just enjoy and you can slightly switch your brain off. And then there are books in that category that are just so appallingly written. And I can think of one in particular that I picked up in an airport bookshop a few years ago, and I thought, well, this is an author who's written lots and lots of this kind of book, and I thought, well, I've never read them, and they're bestsellers, and maybe I will enjoy this as a sort of mindless beach read. And my goodness, I think my friend who I went on holiday with kind of regretted that she got me into the bookshop, because I sort of spent the entire holiday interrupting her sunbathing to kind of complain about how poorly written this book was. And it wasn't that it was kind of fun and frivolous, because I'm all up for that.
And this is a best-selling.
Yeah, that it just kind of like offended me that this was being read when there were so many other great books in a similar genre.
Yeah, okay. I thought you might say some political biography that you had to make you a way through.
I probably ought to confess that I may never have reached the end of some of those.
Yeah. And that's fair enough. What are some book recommendations? They can be very recent or something you read over the last year or so.
Well, possibly some of your listeners might have read a book called Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, which was one of the books shortlisted for the Booker Prize last year. Didn't end up winning it, which was just absolutely sort of beautiful, almost a kind of parable, morality tale in, I think, 100 pages or something remarkable like that, but it still managed to be sort of very affecting and powerful. But the reason I mentioned that is that over Christmas, I thought, well, if that was brilliant, and I love that, I'll read one of her others, which is often something I would do. So I went back and got a copy of Foster, a book that she wrote, I think maybe 10 years ago or something. And I think that's even shorter. I think it's sort of 85 pages or something. I mean, definitely a sort of book that if people are in a reading slump or they haven't read for a while, or if someone just wants something accessible they can read in a weekend, that I would recommend that, because it's just not talking about badly written sentences. I mean, this is the opposite. It's not a single word is wasted, and it's this sort of powerful, very moving story of a girl growing up in rural Ireland with impoverished parents who ended up going and living for a time with another family. So moving and powerful. I mean, I definitely recommend that. Another book is a great book called Money Men by Dan McCrum, which she's the FT journalist who sort of essentially brought down Wirecard, and it's his story of how that happened. Both sort of the rise and fall of Wirecard, but also the kind of fascinating sort of behind the scenes look at how a big media organization goes about an investigation like that. And obviously it was pretty hairy at times when you're facing all these legal risks and all of that sort of stuff. And I think it's a great book because it's an insight into a world that a lot of people wouldn't know much about, but B, because it still manages to read like a thriller, I mean, it really does kind of pull you through, and I was kind of finishing one chapter and wanting to start on the next. Yeah. So that's a really brilliant book. I mean, the other thing that we do, which I love doing actually, is we run this book subscription thing. So, which I think a lot of people have given as Christmas presents, which is really sweet, or sort of birthday presents, or sometimes people just give it to themselves, which I think is nice as well. But that's really fun because we give people like a survey that they fill in, just like with a little short biography about themselves, and then a bit of sort of background about sort of books that they've read in the past, kind of genres they enjoy or don't enjoy, that kind of thing, how much they like being pushed out of their comfort zone. And then I kind of matchmake them almost with like a member of my team who is most sort of resembles them in terms of their reading habits, who then picks out a surprise book for them every month and sort of wraps it up and posts it to them.
And this is only novels?
No, we do both.
Okay.
Both. So you can choose non-fiction or fiction or a bit of both. And that's really fun actually, because it appeals to my love of sort of people watching and figuring out their eccentricities and kind of, it's almost sort of cod psychology, trying to work out what might appeal to someone or whatever. But also, I've had good feedback from, I think quite often people have discovered new authors that they wouldn't otherwise have looked for. But just as much, I think people just enjoy the kind of sensation of getting something through the mail and opening it up, even if it turns out to be, an author they wouldn't necessarily have read. Yeah.
Perhaps a niche question, but let's say I want to buy a specific book. It might be a non-fiction, something not that everyone would read, so you wouldn't necessarily carry it. Instead of buying it on the website with traditional name, where should I be buying books like that if it's a bit special and I have to probably request it?
Well, here,
But you offer that.
So. Yeah. So we're as quick as the website that I won't name usually. So if a book is in print in Britain, we can usually get it the next day. So the people often request it in the shop, and we have behind the counter sort of a large bookcase which is full at the moment of orders that people have made, of requests that we haven't had in, and they're just waiting to be collected. Or on our website there's a form that people can quickly fill in saying that, hey, have you got, can you order this book for me? And we can then either keep it in the shop or post it out to them.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, who knew? All right, so thank you so much, Tom. So a couple of things for our readers our listeners to keep in mind. First, if they haven't been here, they should definitely pop around, have a drink, have a coffee, and buy a book and chat to you and the team. And then consider the book subscription if they feel like that's something for them. And then, any events you want to highlight in the coming couple of months?
Just to sort of keep an eye on our social media, read the backstory, and that's where we'll be posting everything. Okay. So thank you so much.
No, thank you, Tom.